I was standing in my Manhattan loft, barefoot on polished oak floors, the city skyline burning gold outside my window. A half-finished canvas leaned against the wall, still wet, still alive. The smell of oil paint mixed with the faint sweetness of the white roses my assistant had placed in a glass vase. My silk blouse clung lightly to my skin. I'd been working for hours. That's when my phone buzzed. A message. From them. My parents. It wasn't an apology. It never is. It was an RSVP to the biggest gallery opening of my career. We'll be there tonight. Don't start without us. As if the world had ever waited for them. I stared at the screen, feeling that familiar cocktail of emotions swirl inside me. Pride, hurt, resilience, and a sharp edge of irony. They had skipped my very first art show years ago, brushed it off as a childish phase, a distraction. And now, my paintings sell for millions. I ran my fingertips over the dried paint ridges on a finished canvas, remembering the girl I once was, desperate for them to show up. But that night, the only empty seats had been the ones reserved for my parents. And tonight they wanted front row. I smiled, because tonight they'd finally see me. I was 19 the night of my first art show. It wasn't grand, not like the glittering events I host now. Back then, it was a cramped gallery tucked between a laundromat and a coffee shop in Brooklyn. The walls smelled faintly of espresso and bleach, and the lighting was harsh, buzzing with fluorescent nerves. But to me, it was everything. I wore a dress I'd thrifted for $15, pale lavender, a little too big on the shoulders, and I'd spent hours curling my hair, trying to look like I belonged in a room filled with people who believed in art. My hands trembled as I adjusted each frame on the wall, smoothing invisible wrinkles from my canvas labels. Every 5 minutes, I glanced at the door. Because they had promised. My parents had said they would come. My mom even asked what time the show started. My dad, distracted as always, had muttered something about traffic. But I believed them. I wanted to believe them. As strangers trickled in, sipping cheap wine from plastic cups, tilting their heads at my brushstrokes, I felt a lump form in my throat. Every time the gallery door opened, my chest lifted with hope. And every time it wasn't them, I sank a little lower. By the end of the night, I knew. They weren't coming. I smiled through it. I even laughed at a man's joke about starving artists, though the words cut deeper than he knew. My lavender dress suddenly felt childish, my curls heavy, my canvases inadequate. When the gallery owner thanked me, I nodded politely, but my eyes were locked on those 2 empty seats in the front row. Reserved. Waiting. Mocking me. That night, after the gallery closed, I stood alone in front of my favorite painting, a piece I'd poured my heart into, all blues and silvers and jagged edges of red. My hands shook as I traced the air near its surface. It was the closest thing I had to a diary, a confession, a prayer. "You can't let them define you," a soft voice said. It was Mrs. Adler, my high school art teacher, who had stopped by after her evening class. She pressed something small into my hand, a worn silver pendant shaped like a paintbrush. This belonged to my mother. She told me once, "Paint like you're speaking to the one person who will understand. Forget the rest." I clutched it so tightly, the edges pressed into my palm. That night, I made a decision. If my parents couldn't see me, the world would. The morning after that first show, I woke up with swollen eyes and lavender fabric wrinkled at the foot of my bed. My parents hadn't even called to ask how it went. That silence, it did something to me. I stopped waiting for applause that would never come. Instead, I poured myself into the canvas. I painted when the world slept, hunched over in the corner of my tiny apartment, the air thick with turpentine, my fingers stained with cobalt and ochre. My neighbors banged on the walls at 2 a.m., but I couldn't stop. My brush felt like a lifeline, and every stroke whispered, "Keep going." At first, it was brutal. Rejection emails piled up. Not a fit for our gallery. Too raw. Too unconventional. Some buyers offered insultingly low amounts, $50 for a piece that had taken me weeks. I wanted to scream, to burn every canvas. But then came the small wins. My very first sale, a tiny painting of stormy seas, went to a young woman who told me, with tears in her eyes, "It feels like my heart." She paid me $200. I held that money in my hands as if it were gold. It wasn't the amount. It was proof that someone saw me. Later, I met Elena Vargas, a seasoned art dealer with crimson lipstick and a sharp eye. She wandered into one of my smaller exhibits, lingered at my work, and said simply, "You have a voice. It's unpolished, but it's yours. Don't lose it." Elena became my mentor. She taught me how to frame not just my art, but myself, how to talk about my work, how to survive in an industry that devours the uncertain. She introduced me to curators, critics, collectors. She wasn't gentle, but she was honest. And slowly, painfully, doors opened. My first feature in a gallery that mattered. My first collector, who paid more than I made in 3 months at my part-time job. The night a painting sold at auction for $10,000, I remember staring at the number like it was a typo. But through it all, I told my parents nothing. On social media, I posted only hints, pictures of me in paint-splattered jeans, vague captions like, "working late," or "new project." I didn't brag. I didn't share. Because deep down, I was terrified. Terrified that if they knew, they'd dismiss it again, laugh it off as a lucky accident. So, I built my empire quietly. Painting after painting. Show after show. Until my name began to mean something in rooms I had once only dreamed of entering. And then came the headlines. Young American artist breaks auction records. From Brooklyn basements to billionaire walls. My work began selling for prices I couldn't even comprehend, 6 figures, then 7. Yet in my parents' eyes, I was still just their daughter, wasting her potential. They had no idea, but they were about to find out. The gallery was already humming when I arrived that night. Crystal chandeliers glowed above white walls, and the air buzzed with the low murmur of collectors, critics, and journalists. Glasses clinked, cameras flashed, and my paintings, stood bathed in soft light like they belonged to another world. I wore a deep emerald gown, its silk sweeping the floor as I moved, confident in a way that 19-year-old me never could have imagined. Elena kissed both my cheeks and whispered, "Tonight, you're not just an artist. You're a phenomenon." And then they walked in. My parents. I spotted them instantly, standing stiff at the entrance, dressed in clothes that looked too formal, too deliberate. My mother's eyes darted across the room, scanning every corner, every detail. My father adjusted his tie, his jaw set like he was bracing for impact. For a moment, I almost faltered. Because no matter how much you grow, there's a part of you, a fragile, foolish part, that still hopes. Hopes they'll look at you with pride, with love, with something resembling the validation you once begged for. They approached slowly, their eyes widening as they took in the canvases towering above them. Bold strokes of crimson, haunting shadows, explosions of gold and sapphire. My soul, in pigment and oil. This is yours," my mother whispered, her voice barely audible above the chatter. "All of it," I said, my tone calm, even. They exchanged a glance. My father's brows furrowed. "These people, they're here for you?" I nodded. "Every last one." Just then, a man in an impeccable suit approached, shaking my hand enthusiastically. "Congratulations again, Miss Carter. Your Solitude in silver just sold for $2.4 million. Bidding was fierce." My father froze. My mother's lips parted, but no words came. I let the silence stretch, savoring it. For years, I had begged for scraps of acknowledgement. Tonight, the acknowledgement was undeniable, written in dollar signs, headlines, and odd gazes. I guided them deeper into the gallery, past collectors murmuring about brushwork, journalists scribbling notes, a curator telling someone, "She's redefining contemporary expressionism." We stopped in front of the painting that had made the evening news, a massive canvas of fractured blues and molten golds. "This piece," I said softly, "was inspired by the night of my first art show." Their faces tightened. They knew exactly which night I meant. I saved 2 seats. Front row. My voice didn't shake. It was steady, sharp. But you never came. Everyone else saw me. Except you. My mother's eyes glistened. My father cleared his throat, shifting uncomfortably, his usual defense crumbling under the weight of what surrounded him. You've done well for yourself, he finally managed. Done well? I let out a small laugh. I built an empire out of the very thing you dismissed as a phase. My name is on the lips of collectors around the world. And tonight, people are fighting for my work like it's oxygen. They didn't respond. They couldn't. So I looked at them, really looked at them, and said the words I had once only rehearsed in my head. You skipped my first art show. But tonight, you don't just get to see me. You get to see what I became without you. The silence that followed was deafening, heavier than applause, heavier than gold. And for the first time in my life, I wasn't the one trembling. They lingered by the painting, both of them silent, like tourists in a foreign country without a map. For years, I had been the one shrinking under their disapproval. Now, the power had shifted, and we all felt it. Madison, my mother finally whispered, her voice fragile. We didn't realize. I held up a hand. Don't say you didn't realize. You knew. You just didn't care. Her lips quivered, and for the first time in my life, she had no retort. My father, always so quick to dismiss, lowered his gaze to the polished floor. It would have been so easy to bask in revenge, to shut them out entirely. But I didn't want revenge. I wanted something deeper, respect, on my terms. You want to be part of my life again? I asked, my voice calm, steady. Then here are the conditions. Their heads lifted, eyes wide. First, I said, you will never belittle me or my work again. Not in public, not in private, not even in the safety of your own thoughts. If you can't respect what I've built, then you don't get access to me. My father swallowed hard but nodded slightly. Second, you will stop treating dreams as weakness. If someone in this family, me or anyone else, has the courage to chase what sets their soul on fire, you will support them. Not ridicule, support. My mother's eyes flickered, guilt flashing across her face like lightning. And third, I paused, letting the silence stretch. If you want to walk beside me now, you need to confront your own patterns. The control, the dismissiveness, the way you measure worth only in practicality. That ends here. Or so does this relationship. They looked stunned, as though I'd flipped the script of our entire family play. Which I had. I softened, but only slightly. I'm not shutting the door on you. But I'm no longer a little girl waiting at that door either. If you want back in, you'll do the work. You'll change. My father exhaled sharply, his pride fractured. My mother reached out, her fingertips brushing mine, tentative, almost pleading. We will try, she whispered. For the first time, the weight wasn't on me to prove myself. It was on them. And standing in that gallery, surrounded by my triumphs, I realized something profound. I didn't need their approval anymore. The conditions weren't for validation, they were for boundaries. For healing. For me. Because power isn't loud. Sometimes, power is a quiet, unwavering voice that says, "This is who I am. Take it or leave it." The weeks after the gallery opening were quieter, almost surreal. My parents didn't vanish, but they didn't rush either. For the first time in my life, they were careful, measuring their words, tiptoeing into conversations like guests in a home they no longer owned. And strangely, I didn't resent it, because the balance had shifted. One afternoon, my mother visited my studio. She stood by the window, watching me work in silence, her hands folded, her eyes softer than I remembered. She didn't criticize the mess, the splattered jeans, or the half-finished canvases. She just watched, and after a long pause, she said quietly, "I never understood how much of you lived in these colors." It wasn't an apology, but it was something. My father took longer. Pride was his fortress, and breaking through it was no small task. But slowly, he began showing up, helping carry supplies, asking questions about upcoming shows. He didn't always get it right, but he was trying. And for the first time, I let him. Healing wasn't instant. It never is. But it was beginning. One night, alone in my studio, I found myself holding that silver paintbrush pendant Mrs. Adler had given me years ago. Its edges had dulled with time, but its weight in my hand was the same. I remembered her words, "Paint like you're speaking to the one person who will understand." Back then, I thought that person had to be my parents. Now, I know better. That person is me. I paint for the girl in the lavender dress who waited at the door for people who never came. I paint for the woman who rose from that silence and built a voice so loud, it can't be ignored. I paint for every dreamer who has been told their fire was foolish. As I placed the pendant back on the shelf, I smiled. Because I finally understood the truth. Their absence had been my catalyst. Their rejection had carved the space where my determination grew. So yes, my parents skipped my first art show. But now my paintings sell for millions. And more importantly, I no longer need them to clap. Because I've already learned to stand on my own stage.